I've always been one of the types of people that, I want to train everything and I want to learn everything that I can from as many different people as I can. And I found, especially here recently, I found that the more that I try to stick to one system, to limitate myself into one system, um, I end up trying to be that system. I try to be a defense lab guy, or I try to be a Pakiti guy, or I try to be uh, whatever. And I've found that, at least for me, that the more that I try to do that, the more that I don't feel like I'm being true to myself. You know, um, there's so much out there to choose from. There's so much out there to so many different masters that you can learn from, and I've learned from some absolutely amazing ones. All across Jeet Kune Do and Pakiti and Krav and all these things. Um, and I never would have done that had I not decided to branch out and play with other systems. And one of the things that I realized the most is that in your martial arts career, you should come to the point where it's less about how good of a Krav Maga guy can I be, and more about how can I make this a part of my own individual self-expression. And you've heard self-expression from Bruce Lee, right? He was really big on it's not the art being expressed, it's the self being expressed. And with that being said, it to me, it's more about, I take these things that work really good for me, like the shapes from Defense Lab. I absolutely love that particular technique, but it's not something that I would throw into every single thing that I do. It's not something that I would limit myself to where everything has to be a shape. I take the boxing fundamentals that I've learned from Jeet Kune Do and from boxing, and I use a shape. And again, I used to have trouble with this, and it was even to the point to where I was talking to a guy that I was training with, very amazing instructor, very amazing individual, and he was a Krav instructor, but he was also in the process of making it more for him and what he was doing. And I was telling him, I feel like, and at that point I was really hard and heavy into JKD, and um, I was telling him, I just feel like, it's JKD for me. I need to do JKD. It's nothing but JKD. And he told me, he's like, the idea of Krav Maga is not, you need to be the best at Ayal's Krav Maga, or you need to be the best at Alan's Krav Maga, or whoever's Krav Maga. Like, you need to be the best at David's Krav Maga, and that encompasses anything that your body would do, that you would do. Like, again, going back to the individual self-expression. And if I've learned anything from the martial arts, it's that. It's not about how good of a JKD guy I can be. It's about, how can I use JKD to make myself, my expression, even better. And that kind of goes back to why I decided to start training Pakiti Tersha, specifically with Tuhan Tim Wade, because, for one, he has a very unique training system. You don't see that the way that Tuhan Tim trains, you don't see that in any other aspect of Pakiti Tersha, and hardly in any other aspect of Filipino martial arts. And, so that caught my attention right off the bat, because it was more about the fight, and it was more about actual protection, which is what I focus 99.9% of my training on, is actual protection, protection for myself, or protection for the people that I love, and after training with him for some time, uh, he was incrementally showing me that, the whole basis of everything that we do is validation. And when you first start out, you're thinking, okay, I need to validate these techniques. I need to validate, the strategies that I'm trying to enact. I need to validate the system itself. But then you realize, through spending more time with them and training with them, that, yeah, that type of validation is important, but what you're really trying to validate is yourself, you know. And we had a discussion one time, and he told me, he's like, David, you're a lot bigger than I am. You're not going to move like me. You're not gonna act like me. You're not gonna attack like me. Like, you need to find how to take this and use this and make it yours. And when you go looking for that validation, you're not trying to validate Paquita Tertia. That's been validated. It's still here. It's still thriving because it has been validated. You need to validate yourself. And that set off a bell for me because, you know, my entire martial arts career, that's what I've been trying to do. That's what that's what I've been trying to do. I just didn't know it. I didn't know that I was, training these things to try to validate myself, in my skill, my understanding, but also how I'm taking these things and making it a part of my life, Pakiti specifically, through Tuhan Tim's guidance. I've been able to take a lot of the principles that we're training and not just apply it to, the skill building, but I mean, I apply it to every aspect of my life. If there's a problem, if there's an issue, you have to attack it. You can't be defensive, because if you're defensive, you're behind timing, and thusly you're losing the fight. So if something that comes along in your life, instead of just like sitting there and waiting, and maybe this will be okay, or whatever, you attack it. You handle the problem. You do what you have to do to take care of the business that you need to take care of. And that has being able to carry those principles into everyday life, again, self-expression, that has helped me to find my own validation. I think it's really important, that when you're starting out training, you have to learn how to crawl. You have to learn how to walk before you could ever learn how to run. And so, yeah, I think sticking to the technical aspect, and trying to build yourself within the system, using the system as a guide to make yourself better, I think is absolutely important. And I don't think there's anything wrong with staying with one system per se, if it's feeding those needs for you. But eventually, you get to the point to where you spend so much time training, no matter what it is that you're training, even if it's new, you're already starting off kind of at a running type of action. So finding these things to help you better express yourself is what's important. And I haven't been able to do that by sticking to just one style and one system. I have a tendency to want to fully envelop myself in whatever it is that I'm training, so much so that I get distracted to the point that I forget what I already know. And we went through this, a few years back. We were at a training seminar with Roy Miller, and that was a lot of fun. But we were doing this King of the Ring type of training scenario, to where one person gets in, and you have to take the other person out of the ring without letting your knees touch the ground, or without you falling over, or without you leaving the circle. And we get in there, and I get in there with somebody roughly my same size, because we lined up by size, and I lost first fight out, and it didn't even take that long. And I come over to you, and you just kind of had this look, and you said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm not a wrestler." And you said, "Are you crazy? You have spent your entire life training these things. You have a black belt in Japanese jiu-jitsu. You've trained these systems where, the focus is moving another human body, defense lab and stuff like that. Like, why are you forgetting who you are?" And I find that when I try to envelop myself into something, and I try to take it all in, and I willingly limit myself to just that one system, I forget who I am. I forget all these things that I've learned before. I forget all these things, the strengths that I have, and so on and so forth. And I start performing to the level of what the system allows. And I think that's detrimental. I think that is, it's a really hard thing to see, and it's an even harder thing to do. And it's something I'm still battling with now, is that, you should never forget, under any circumstance, who you are, because it's who you are that makes you who you are. Everything that you've trained before, everything that you've ever done, every hurdle, whether it's in the martial arts or whether it's in all of life period, if you forget all these things that made you who you are and the strength that it's given you, you're only going to perform to the limitation of what somebody or some other system set. And that's not fair to anybody. It's surely not fair to you, and that's not how you grow. And a funny thing with that is, after we had that conversation, I went back in, and And I ended up clearing the whole line and then went through the line again. And I finally got booted out when I was just so tired that I just couldn't do it anymore. And, but it was a growth moment for me because then I was able to take those limitations off. And it's like, I can do this, and sometimes you need a guide to kind of help you remember exactly who you are and what you can do. So there's another instructor that I started training with years back that really helped me to kind of come more into my own and be more of who I was supposed to be when it comes to just, martial arts and just life in general. And it was actually my first JKD instructor. His name is Sifu Willie Wilson III. Just call him Sifu Wilson or Sifu. And I remember that before training with him, I'd always lived in like small town East Texas, and there was never access to things like Jeet Kune Do and to Filipino martial arts, and all these other arts that I train now. And
but by this time you had been training for quite a while.
Yeah, by that time I had been training for quite a while, but it had been like Tae Kwon Do and Japanese Jiu Jitsu and Goju-ryu karate and stuff like that, But as soon as I moved to the city, I immediately started looking up at a JKD instructor because, growing up with the martial arts, I was a huge fan of Bruce Lee and stuff like that. I watched the Jason Bourne movies and all that kind of stuff. And I really wanted to get the chance to train in that stuff. And I remember finding him was really, really difficult because he didn't advertise outwardly. And, it was small group, small community, all that kind of stuff. But I ended up coming across his information and I called him. I was like, hey, I've been interested in Jeet Kune Do for a long time, and I'd really like to try out a class. And he's like, yeah, come on down, gave me directions, all that kind of stuff. And I remember on the way to class, I got like horrifically lost. Like I didn't know where I was. I didn't know where to go. Big city, small town kid and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, man, so I called him up and I was like, I'm so lost, but I don't want to miss class. And he actually was on the way to class and he pulled off the highway kind of where I was at. And we met up and he let me follow him to the gym. And it was like right then and there, I was like, okay, this is something different, just the compassion and the patience. And so I get into this first class and he ended up doing something that I'd never had done before. It was actually really quite new to me. And to kind of paint the picture a little bit, keep in mind, I'm a second degree black belt in Tae Kwon Do. I'm a black belt in Japanese Jiu Jitsu, and I'm a black belt in Goju-ryu karate. So I thought I was, like I was hot stuff. Like, I wasn't the best in the world, but I knew what I was doing. And we get in there and, just randomly in a group of people that I've never met before in my life, he comes up to me with a pair of Thai pads. He says, I want you to kick me. And so I threw a kick, as you would expect a seasoned point fighter, Taekwondo guy to throw a kick, which was pretty, had a lot of snap and all that kind of stuff, lacked power and lacked drive and all that kind of stuff. And he's like, okay, I want you to kick me again. And so I kicked him again. And, we went through a couple kicks, we went through some punches, we went through, just moving around and stuff like that. And he's like, okay. And then he went and set the pads down and proceeded with the class. And the class, again, it was something that I wasn't used to because the way of training JKD is a lot different than, doing a Taekwondo class or doing a karate class or something like that. And so it was all very new to me. And I mean, he was a trainer of trainers. I mean, he was the kind of guy that, if you were training with Sifu Wilson, people knew like you were good. You were really good. And so I'm training with all these guys and I'm feeling like I was already in the middle of the class doing my exhibition, my demonstration, and all that kind of stuff. So I was kind of like stood off by that. And I'm training with these guys who are just monsters. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. And I'm doing the stuff that I don't really know what I'm doing. And that was the class. And I had a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the atmosphere and all that kind of stuff. And then I came back to the next class and he kind of pulled me aside and he was like, so, what are you looking for? I was like, well, I just want to be the best that I want to be. He's like, okay, we can help you do that. And Sifu Wilson is really soft-spoken. He's not loud. He's not really just in your face. He's not any of those stuff. He's really soft-spoken, but I started noticing things like he would take extra time with me, showing me how to, throw my power, showing me how to be more effective in what we were doing and all that kind of stuff. And I'd been around the block enough to know that, this instructor is taking a little bit of extra time with me that he really didn't have to. He had a class full of people. And then there was this one day we were working on the JKD way of throwing a punch. So when I'm throwing the punch, I'm not trying to punch all the way through. I'm not trying to push you. I'm throwing a punch and I'm popping back, enough to where the shock of the attack, you feel it internally inside of your body. And I just couldn't get it. And he just, he was being helpful and being helpful and being helpful. And, we would go over and over and over again. And then finally he was like, David, you got to stop, man. You're in your way. You have to just let it go. Just let it go and do it. And I did. And the way because again, he's very soft spoken. Like when he's talking to you, you have to like get that ear in close because you might not hear what he's saying. And he was like, I don't want to say loud because he wasn't loud, but he enough to shock me, And I got it. I got the punch. And so he went up and picked up his thigh pads. He's like, all right, now kick me. And I threw the kick. And it took me a couple times. And, he's like, get out of your own way. And I threw the kick. And I got it. But I was able to feel it. I was able to feel like what it was like to stop thinking about this stuff. Stop letting it go in your mind and just let go. Just let go and just, do what you already know how to do, And that was it was a wake up moment for me because again, I'm experienced and I'm coming up and I'm thinking, that I know what I'm doing. And I was in a situation where I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing. And, he really helped to guide me to get out of my own way. And throughout the years, even to this day, we still talk to each other. And, obviously I live far away from him. I can't train with him. Definitely not like I wish I could. But we still talk and he still tells me, I always knew you had potential and I'm very proud of you. And for somebody that I have so much respect for and so much love for, and who has watched me grow, in the martial arts since him, that just means the world to me. And to be honest with you, it never would have happened had he not taught me initially how to get out of my own way, how to free my mind and just do. So it takes a really good instructor to know that when you're in the exact moment that you need to hear something specific and be able to say it as well. And I think that was a big part of it, is that Sifu Wilson, again, he's a once in a lifetime type instructor. Anybody who has ever trained with him will tell you, that he's just not your run of the mill. He has that knowledge and that understanding and just to be able to guide you in a way that you're ready to receive. He can say something until he's blue in the face. And if you're not ready to receive it, you'll never hear it, But he knew that at that point in time, that's what was going on. And he knew that I was questioning it inside of my head. And he knew that it's the moment. And so he said what he said. And he knew that it would wake me up. And it did. I've spent a lot of time in Defense Lab. And before it was Keysi Fighting Method, but, then it went to Defense Lab. And when the split happened, I went to Defense Lab with Andy Norman. And, I don't train with him anymore. I couldn't even tell you what is going on with the Defense Lab system as we speak, because I don't know. That doesn't mean that I didn't get good information and good progression when I was training with them. And I remember, when I was in Spain, I spent some time in Spain and I got to train with Andy Norman and I got to train with Ruben. He was pretty high up in the Defense Lab system at that time. And I remember I was having a really hard time trying to figure out how to make the system work. I could replicate the moves because I've been training and, I could do all the things, albeit it probably wasn't as pretty as it needed to be. But, I could make it work, but I still wasn't there. And I got an amazing opportunity to spend a couple hours with Andy, one-on-one. And, he kind of picked up that I was having these issues. He kind of did a a little bit of the same thing that I talked about Sifu Wilson doing of like, all right, let's see what you have. And so I think he kind of picked up on one of the issues that I had. But, you know, one of the things that Andy liked to teach people was mentality. You know, when you're in a fight, you have this mentality of it's always attack. You know, I'm trying to tear the crap out of everything that I'm touching. You know, and that's what I was having a hard time with is at that particular time, I was trying to go through these movements and replicate these movements, but I didn't understand exactly what I was doing. And so we spent, you know, a couple hours, and he was able to explain to me and to show me and to help me understand, you know, the mentality behind the system of what you're trying to do. You know, when you're in a fight, it's not about, okay, I'm going to score with this jab. I'm going to use this jab to you know, open up for the uppercut, and then I'm going to do a switch kick, and then I'm going to create distance. And you know, it doesn't work like that. You know, an actual fight, a real fight to protect yourself, it doesn't work like that. You know, regardless of what anybody says, you don't have the time to think about that. You have to have this mentality of, I'm going to absolutely destroy any and everything that I touch by any means possible. Doesn't matter what level I'm on, whether I'm standing, kneeling, you know, laying down on the ground. It doesn't matter. You know, it just doesn't matter. And, you know, that was always a hang up for me as well, because, you know, it was always about, up until that time, it was always about, how do I move in a way that the system is taught, you know, like Krav Maga, for instance. You know, somebody comes with that wide punch, I'm going to do a 360 with a simultaneous punch. And then I'm going to follow up with another punch. And then I'm going to follow up with a kick. And then I'm going to, you know, and you can't think in those terms. You just can't. You should have trained to the point where you start just moving, and things work for you. But you can't sit there and think about, you know, what you're going to do next. And you have to let go. You know, you have to let go, and you have to become just a force to be reckoned with. You know, and up until that point, I never had that. You know, I had manufactured aggression, which means that I could like sit here and like, okay, now I got to get aggressive, you know. But it wasn't a natural instinct. It wasn't a natural inclination. And part of that was because I wasn't able to just let go. And training with Andy for those hours that I spent, and then, you know, following up with him and talking more with him over the years, and training more things with him over the years, he was able to help get me over that hurdle of just letting go and putting yourself in that situation where it's like, you know, it's gonna have to be me or you, and it's not gonna be me. You know, had I not spent that time with him, I don't know that I would have ever gotten that. I mean, maybe, but not in the way that he helped me get there. So even though I'm not with them, and I will probably never be with them again, that doesn't mean that I didn't gain something just exponential, that I didn't gain something that has helped me in my journey of not just growth within the systems, but growth as a human being. So we were at this camp in Tampa, an instructor camp for Pikiti with Tuan Tim Wade. And, you know, the Tampa camps are always that's our highlight of the year, right? That's every year we have the Tampa camp. And, you know, it's always a big deal because that's where everybody comes down. You get to train with everybody. And, you know, it's a pretty awesome experience because you get to spend a day on the beach. And I'm sorry, but any day spent on the beach training Filipino martial arts is about the best day that you're going to have as a martial artist, 100%. Until you get that sunburn, and then it kind of sucks. But other than that, it's an amazing experience. And I remember when I first started training with Tim, you know, everybody told me that Pikita Tertia, and more specifically the way that Tim does it, so PTK SMF, you're going to feel like you're not understanding it. You're going to spend a good 6 months, if not more, like wondering, like, am I ever going to understand this? I can't understand this. I can't make this work as an instructor. You know, I can't understand this. I can't make this work. There's so much. How do I, you know, how do I go from A to B when I'm stuck on Z, you know? And I felt that. I felt that. Every time I would go to a camp, I would get so frustrated because we would be working on things and we would be doing things. And I just, internally, I did not feel like I was getting it, right? I couldn't understand Bikini. I couldn't understand the systemization of how we were doing what we were doing. And I remember, I was spending time we were going over a specific drill called Daku Pupunya. And it's a cornerstone drill for Bikini Tersha. It quite literally teaches you everything about the system within this one drill. And obviously there's different levels to it. And we were doing this drill. And again, I was doing this drill off of just muscle memory of having replicated the movements, choreography, basically. Having replicated the movements, I know that the first step is this, the second step is this, the third step is this, and then you repeat on the other side, right? So Tuhan and Simon were watching me do this drill with one of my other instructor friends, and they kind of pulled me off to the side. And I was sitting here like, oh crap, now I got the attention of the higher ups, so to speak. And, I was wondering how this was going to go. We had already been training for 2 days, 3 days, whatever. And I was tired and all that kind of stuff. So I was kind of wondering, how this was going to go. And so I go over there with them and they helped me to refine my movements, because they were a little bit sloppy and they were like, okay, let's make this better. And, we were all standing there talking and kind of, briefing and debriefing and stuff. And Tuan said, yeah, the whole within the system, the whole system is within this drill. Every aspect of this system you'll find in this drill. And me in my mind at that time was like, I just, I don't see it. I don't see it. I don't understand it. They're like, yeah, you will, if you can understand this drill, you'll understand Bikini Tersha. And at the time I was like, I had thought that, I hadn't understood it up until now. I don't see what doing this drill over and over, which I already had been, is going to teach me. And so I start working with Simon, and we start going through the drill, and we're talking about the basic part of the drill and how it gets a little bit more advanced. And we went through the advanced and all this kind of stuff. And I think both Tuhan and Simon knew that I was in my way again. I was sitting there overthinking it. I still, for the life of me, cannot figure out how I'm going to find the system of Bikini within this drill. And so instead of talking anymore, Simon did something that I did not expect at the time. And we started flowing in this drill, and then he just started throwing random attacks, just random stuff. And he was attacking me with thrusts, with slashes, doing the advanced part of the drill, coming up with things that I've never even known, or, like I was not prepared at all. And I didn't know that we were going to be doing this. And then after spending probably about a good 30 seconds to a minute of doing nothing but attacking me, and I was defending, I was answering every single one of those attacks, I was able to attack again. Within the confines of this drill, he stopped. He said, do you know what you just did? And it took a second because my mind was like blown, right? Because we go from just rehearsing this drill over and over and over and me just going through the steps, and, it's where like he caught me at the perfect moment and just started throwing all of these attacks. And what I mean by the perfect moment is I had finally gotten so damn frustrated with, like, I just don't understand this. I don't see how this is going to teach me anything. I stopped. And that split second of I just let it go, he came after me. And he came after me with a freaking fury. Because one of the things about training with these higher ups, when you're ready, they will not let up on you. They will not attack you slow and let's get these movements. And no, they are coming for real. And if you don't block, if you don't answer the attack the way that you're supposed to, you'll get hit. You'll get hit. They have control, but you will get hit. I didn't get hit. And he asked me, he said, do you know what you did? I said, I let go. I just stopped. He said, yeah. He said, did you know that I attacked you with everything that I had? Every attack that you could possibly imagine. And within the confines of this drill, not only were you able to protect yourself from every attack, from every angle, you were attacking me back. And you were forcing me to have to react to that. You realize that that's what you did. And I took a second to think about it. And it was like a light bulb went off. And I'm always really happy about talking about this because that light bulb went off. It was like there was this big at a theater, they have that curtain. They have that curtain. You're sitting there looking at the curtain. You're like, man, I wonder what's behind that. I wonder what's going on back there. And then the curtain drops, and then you see everything. The show, so to speak, starts. And that's exactly what happened at that moment. The curtain dropped, and not only did I understand Bikita Tertian, not only did I understand SMF, not only did I understand what it was that they were trying to teach me, but I understood it all. You know, I started seeing ways of how what I was learning on the floor with the stick was transferring over into my everyday life. I understood, all these things that Tuhan has been telling me, because at this time I was 2 years in, and these past 2 years, and all these things that he was telling me, that is like, I understand it now. I get it, you know. And I realized at that moment that me being in my own way, thinking about all this crap that was going on and all this crap that I was trying to achieve, and not only was I standing in my own way of progression, but I was standing in my own way of seeing what the picture actually was. Because up until this time, I thought, I need to, like other systems, I need to memorize these moves, and I need to perform these moves in this order, and then that is success. And that's not the case. That's not the case. Kind of like what I was talking about with Andy. It's not systematic in the way that you approach these things. You have to be able to adapt. You have to be able to improvise. You have to be able to freely express yourself in order to find that success, because you put the time in training. You put the time in doing the movements. But if you think about what move comes next, you're going to hesitate and you're going to stop. And I realized that through that drill, that the second that I let everything go, the highest ranked instructor under Tuhan, was attacking me with everything that he had. And I was able to do something about it. Now, I wasn't going to overpower him. There's absolutely no way. The guy is too good, too good. But that speaks to the level of instructorship that Simon has, and that Tuhan has, is that, they can see what's going on up here by what you're projecting outwards. They can see where you're at in your journey, and they know when to deliver just that little nugget, just that little of, that causes a wildfire of just freeing your mind. Because while you're hanging on to everything, you can't progress. You can't see the big picture for what it is. But the second that you let go of everything and you just be, you stop being limited by what does the system say that I need to do next. What's the next step, in the order of operations, in this drill or in this system or in this, whatever. The minute that you take this information and you internalize it and you use it to build yourself up higher, not the system, you use it to build yourself up higher. You own it. You own every aspect of it because you've put the time, you've put the work in, and then you let go. You just let go. And you utilize that to just let whatever it is that you're doing try to flow, right? Every martial art talks about the flow. You find that flow and you're free. Your mind is free. Your body is free. And you just be. And it's the last point I'm going to make is it's kind of funny. I have test anxiety. I've had to take career tests, whether it's the EMT or firefighter, whatever. I've had to take these really big tests that have held the progression of my career in the palm of its hand. And here recently, I went to go take my EMT test, and obviously I studied, I put the work in, I trained, so to speak, and but there was still this anxiety. And I know now that anxiety is what helps me to get in my own way. I start questioning myself. I start doubting myself. I start wondering, is this right, or is this right, or did I do this wrong, or so on and so forth. And it's funny because I went into that EMT test knowing the work that I put in. I knew that I had spent a lot of time in this class. I spent a lot of time on my practicals, on my skills. I had spent a lot of time studying the book, and I had studied every chance that I could. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to let myself get in my way. And so just a lot like that instance with Simon, I found that perfect moment and I just let go. I just let go and I said, uh, what happens is going to happen. I have to have faith in my preparation. I have to have faith in my skill. And I just let go. And I took that test. And it cut me off at 75 questions, which anybody who knows anything about the EMT test, it's adaptive, but it's going to test you on your knowledge and your skill. And it cut me off at 75 questions. And I said, oh no. Oh no. As a matter of fact, I texted you and I said I either did really good or really bad. And I was a wreck. And you know what happened? I passed. I passed. And I've talked to some people since then, and they said, yeah, if it cut you off at 75 questions, either you did really good to where they knew they didn't need to ask you any more questions, or you just did so bad that, there was absolutely no way it was going to be salvageable. And I passed. And had I gotten into that test like I do everything else in life before I've gained the knowledge to be able to stop myself. Had I gone into that test second guessing myself, questioning myself, wondering, getting in my own way, I don't know that it would have happened. But what I did is I took what I've learned from martial arts, from everything else, from the amazing instructors that I've had, and I stopped and I cleared my mind. I freed my mind and I just did. And I passed.